Spain, a land of castles and cathedrals, where horseshoes clatter on cobblestones and the aroma of spices wafts from souks. But pause. Before the Reconquista crowns Catholic kings, another culture reigned for centuries. The Moors, as European chroniclers called them, were the Muslim peoples of North Africa and Iberia. Dark-eyed and daring, mainly of Arab and Berber stock, these warriors crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in 711 CE and launched an age of golden learning in Al-Andalus. Where did the Moors come from? The name Moor itself comes from the ancient Mori, the Roman name for the tribes of Mauritania, modern Morocco, and Algeria. After Carthage fell in 146 BCE, Romans used Mori to refer to the people of that northwest African coast. Over time, medieval Europeans used Moor broadly for the Muslim inhabitants of Iberia and North Africa. In truth, the Moors were not a single race or kingdom. They were a tapestry of ethnicities. Arab soldiers, indigenous Berbers of the Atlas, even black African battalions, all united under Islam. By 711, this mosaic of North African Muslims was stirred to action by a Visigothic civil war in Spain, and the stage was set for conquest. The word Maghreb, meaning west, reflects how these North Africans were the western edge of the Islamic world. Europeans marveled at their distinct look and learning, calling them the Dark Ones, Greek moroi. But to the Moors themselves, they were part of a vast Islamic civilization stretching from India to Andalusia, carrying knowledge and innovations across continents. In the year 711, a bold Berber general named Tariq ibn Ziyad landed at a rocky promontory, Gibraltar, from Jabal Tariq, Mount of Tariq, with just 7,000 soldiers. Within a few months, Tariq's men routed the Visigothic king Roderic's army at the Battle of Guadalete. Over the next 2 years, Tariq and his commander, Musa ibn Nusair, swept through the peninsula. They took Toledo, Córdoba, and most of Hispania with astonishing speed. By 713, roughly 2/3 of the Iberian Peninsula was under Muslim rule. Within a decade, Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, had emerged, a land of minarets and mosques. Córdoba became its dazzling capital. The invaders were welcomed by Jews and some Christians who had suffered under Visigothic strife. Together, they built a new society. In 732, their advance into Gaul was halted at the Battle of Tours, Poitiers, by the Frankish warlord Charles Martel. Martel's Christian forces decisively defeated the Umayyad army under Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, giving Charles a reputation as the Hammer. This victory is often seen as stopping Islam's northward sweep. Nevertheless, the northern boundaries at the Pyrenees endured. Al-Andalus remained firmly established in Iberia. Islamic Spain, known as Al-Andalus, entered a golden age of science, art, and architecture. From the 8th to the 15th centuries, Córdoba, Granada, Toledo, and Seville buzzed with scholars. Under enlightened caliphs, Córdoba boasted lavish palaces and libraries. One chronicler claims Córdoba's library once held some 400,000 books, an astonishing number for the 10th century, rivaling any city in Christendom. Moorish engineers built thousands of water wheels, noriyas, and underground canals, qanats, transforming arid fields into lush gardens. New crops like sugarcane, citrus fruits, rice, and cotton arrived from the east. In fact, historians call this an Islamic Green Revolution. Al-Andalus became an intellectual beacon. Cities like Zaragoza, Toledo, and Seville emerged as centers of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and agronomy. Scholars in Toledo created the famous Toledan tables of astronomy. In Zaragoza, mathematicians and pharmacists broke new ground. In Córdoba and Seville, great physicians like Ibn Zur, Avenzoar, wrote medical encyclopedias, and philosophers like Ibn Rushd, Averroes fused Islamic and Greek thought. By the 11th century, Andalusi scientists saw themselves on par with Baghdad scholars. Indeed, with the fall of the Eastern Abbasid Caliphate, Spain became one of Islam's last centers of learning. The Great Mosque of Córdoba, La Mezquita, exemplifies this. Begun in 785 by Abd al-Rahman I, it was continuously expanded into a vast hypostyle hall. Its forest of red and white striped arches and elegant columns dazzled medieval visitors. Even today, Córdoba's Cathedral Mosque is hailed as an important monument in Islamic architecture that influenced later Moorish designs. In Granada, the Nasrid emirs built the Alhambra, a palace fortress begun in 1238. It's one of the most famous monuments of Islamic architecture, with its ornate palaces, reflecting pools, and carved stucco. In Seville, the Almohad rulers erected the Giralda, a soaring minaret, now a bell tower, considered a masterpiece of Almohad architecture. These buildings, and many more like them, still stand in Spain, UNESCO-listed treasures testifying to the Moorish legacy. Beyond architecture, the Moors enriched European science and culture. They preserved and translated Greek classics, advancing algebra from Al-Khwarizmi's heritage, optics, and chemistry. Cities like Toledo preserved libraries of Arabic and Greek works, later tapped by Renaissance scholars. Notable figures include the polymaths Averroes, Ibn Rushd, and Ibn al-Khattab, and the poet Ibn Hazm. Even Jew and Christian scholars in Al-Andalus, from Maimonides to Ramon Llull, thrived amid this intellectual flowering. Key figures and battles. We met Tariq ibn Ziyad, the conqueror of 711. Another was Abd al-Rahman I, the Umayyad prince who escaped Abbasid slaughter in Syria to found the Cordoban Emirate. Later, Abd al-Rahman III, 10th century, declared himself Caliph of Córdoba, presiding over an empire from the Pyrenees to the Atlantic. His son Al-Hakam II built that legendary library. On the Christian side, kings like Ferdinand III of Castile, 13th century, and James I of Aragon led the Reconquista advances into Muslim territory. In battle, there were famous clashes beyond Tours. For example, Christians suffered a setback at Alarcos, 1195, against the Almohads, but rebounded dramatically 2 years later. In 1212, at Las Navas de Tolosa, a coalition of Castile, Aragon, and Navarre crushed the Almohad army, shattering Muslim power in Spain. It was a decisive curtailing of Moorish dominance in Iberia. The Reconquista and fall of Moorish Spain. After centuries of ebb and flow, the Christian kingdoms pressed inexorably south. The Reconquista's beginning is traditionally marked by the Battle of Covadonga, about 718, in Asturias, where a small Christian force held off the Moors. However, it was not until the 11th to 13th centuries that the Reconquista truly accelerated. By 1250, most of the peninsula was back in Christian hands. King Ferdinand III of Castile led the charge, taking Córdoba in 1236 and Seville in 1248. By the 13th century, only the Emirate of Granada remained. Granada had become a vassal kingdom under Castile after 1246, but it retained Muslim rule. For 250 years, the Nasrid sultans weathered periodic sieges. Finally, in 1492, after a brutal siege by Ferdinand and Isabella, Granada's last sultan, Muhammad XII, surrendered. The Alhambra's gates were opened to the Catholic monarchs, marking the end of 781 years of Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula. Thus ended the Moorish caliphates, but not their legacy. Legacy of the Moors in modern culture. Today, the legacy of the Moors endures in many subtle ways. In language, the imprint is clear. It's estimated that roughly one Spanish word in 3 has an Arabic origin. Ever wondered why so many Spanish words start with al? That comes from the Arabic article al, the. Words like aceite, oil, and azúcar, sugar, descend straight from Arabic. Place names too, Guadalquivir, Almería, Medina, echo Andalusian geography under the Moors. In architecture and art, the ornate stuccos and arches of Al-Andalus inspired a 19th century Moorish revival in Europe and America. In Spain, the monuments remain. Córdoba's Mezquita continues to awe visitors, as do Seville's Giralda and the Alhambra, which draw millions of tourists enchanted by their architectural beauty. Even everyday Andalusian homes may have a tiled courtyard or latticework window nodding to the Moorish aesthetic. Culturally, the Moors left intangible legacies too. Music and cuisine in southern Spain carry echoes of Al-Andalus. For example, the flamenco's exotic scales trace back to Andalusi melodies, and dishes like gazpacho or pastries sweetened with honey recall Moorish kitchens. Festivals like Moros y Cristianos in Valencia dramatize battles and coexistence between Moors and Christians, keeping the memory alive, for good or bad, in popular memory. Finally, the Moors loom large in history books and legends. Once exotic others of medieval Europe, they have been romanticized in literature, from Washington Irving's Tales of the Alhambra to modern novels. Today, scholars regard Al-Andalus as a symbol of multicultural learning, a time when Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived in near cooperation, convivencia, advancing knowledge. While that golden dream had its tragedies, the Moorish era opened bridges between worlds. In the mosaic of Spanish heritage, the Moors are an indelible piece. The echoes of their drumbeats still hum in Andalusia's alleyways, their manuscripts whisper in dusty libraries, and their patterned walls stand silent, telling stories of an age when Moorish splendor reigned. As we end our journey, ask yourself, when you stroll beneath a horseshoe arch or sip mint tea on a warm Spanish night, aren't you tracing footsteps of a forgotten empire that changed the course of Western history?